Many of us have heard about the glass ceiling, but have you heard about the glass cliff? In the early 2000s, researchers identified a pattern. They found that when a company was struggling, it was much more likely to promote a woman or a person of color into the CEO role than a white man. And this trend has been tracked across companies, governments, and even sports teams. A really common example people use to illustrate the glass cliff in corporate settings is the case of Marissa Mayer, who was appointed as CEO of Yahoo back in 2012 when the company had been facing years of decline. Many viewed it as a sort of sinking ship that nobody could have turned around. In the government, many point to the example of Theresa May, who became Prime Minister of the UK right in the middle of the turmoil that was Brexit. In a similar vein, sometimes people point to Barack Obama as a classic example of a glass cliff situation, a man of color who assumed the presidency right in the middle of a financial crisis. And these are all examples of what researchers have termed the glass cliff. So if a glass ceiling is a sort of invisible ceiling blocking our ascension past a certain point, the glass cliff is this idea that you can be at the top, but there's an invisible and quite dangerous edge that you're statistically likely to fall from. So why is this happening? There are a couple of theories. Some argue that women in particular may just be seen as better leaders in situations of crisis. And in fact, there is data to support this point that female leaders have better relational skills. And there's lots of research in political science that tells us that diplomatic peace deals brokered by female leaders tend to last longer. Another theory is that organizations that are struggling are placing typically underrepresented individuals in a position of leadership to send a strong message to the market or to stakeholders that big changes are coming, to communicate that the company or the government is going to make a big shift and that the organization is investing in progress. But regardless of why this might be happening, researchers pretty much agree that there are lots of negative consequences. First, many argue that it's setting underrepresented and highly capable leaders up for failure. Statistically, any person stepping into a leadership role at a troubled or struggling company is less likely to be viewed as successful than someone stepping into a similar role at a growing company. That's obvious. But the problem is that when most of the leaders of struggling or troubled companies are women and people of color, we start to form these associations between poorly performing companies and underrepresented leaders. You create this opportunity to assume that companies fail or struggle because the leaders come from certain groups, when the source of struggle for the company came before that leader stepped in, not because of that leader. All of this can just serve to reinforce biases and stereotypes we have about leaders and the assumption that certain groups are just less effective leaders than others. So now that we know what the glass cliff is, where it might come from, and the negative consequences it has, what can we actually do about it? For individuals, particularly women and people of color, but really anyone considering a leadership role, it's really important to evaluate the conditions of that position and of the company. Identify, most importantly, the resources you need to succeed and that you know the organization needs to succeed, and make sure that you will have that. One of the main reasons chief diversity officers have such a short tenure is because they're often made lots of promises about what they'll be able to do in the role, but once they get into it, they face pretty significant resource limitations. So make sure you secure those resources in writing, in the contract, and in whatever agreement you take on. From the company or organization side, if you're looking to promote someone into a leadership position when the organization is struggling, it's really important to be aware of this bias that we see in the glass cliff. This doesn't mean you shouldn't promote a woman or a person of color into the role, but it does mean that you need to be extra sure that that person is equipped and resourced with what they say they need to succeed. So hopefully now you know what the glass cliff is the next time you hear it, and you have some strategies to put in place to avoid it.